In recent years, the United States has witnessed a dramatic shift in its economic and industrial landscape, a transformation driven largely by the imposition of steep tariffs under President Trump's administration. With a specific focus on the auto industry, these tariffs have not only redefined market dynamics, but also unleashed a domino effect across global supply chains, consumer prices, and even energy security. This article provides an in-depth exploration of these developments by examining their impact on American auto manufacturers such as Ford, the ripple effects on regional economies, and how international competitors are adapting in this unpredictable trade environment. While these insights are drawn from information available up to November 2023, they illustrate the multifaceted consequences of protectionist trade policies that continue to reverberate across various sectors. At the heart of these changes lies President Trump's decision to impose a sweeping 25% tariff on imported auto parts and vehicles, a policy measure intended to protect domestic manufacturing. However, this decision carries far-reaching consequences. Analysts estimate that the new tariffs could drive up the price of Ford vehicles by anywhere between $2,000 and $5,000 per car. For millions of American consumers, particularly those in the middle class who form the backbone of Ford's customer base, such a price hike threatens to push affordable vehicles out of reach. This tariff-driven surge in costs is not a mere number on paper. When car prices escalate by thousands of dollars, consumer demand inevitably contracts. For manufacturers like Ford, a drop in demand translates directly into reduced revenue, a scenario that could compel the company to scale back production, reconsider its manufacturing strategies, or even outsource production to regions where costs are lower. The resultant economic stress is felt not only on corporate balance sheets, but throughout entire communities that depend on auto manufacturing for their livelihood. The auto industry is particularly vulnerable to such policy shifts because it operates on fine profit margins and a tightly integrated supply chain. Key manufacturing hubs in states like Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee are now under severe stress as companies grapple with rising production costs. Ford's own CEO, Jim Farley, has warned that the escalating tariff burden could force factories to either downsize or relocate production overseas. Such a move would not only diminish the competitive edge of American automakers, but also lead to thousands of job losses, a scenario with profound socioeconomic implications. In practical terms, the higher tariffs affect every stage of the production process. Imported components become more expensive, and when these parts form a significant portion of a vehicle's build, the additional costs accumulate rapidly. For example, in some Ford models, the tariff-induced increase of up to $5,000 makes cars unaffordable for many families. A decline in sales not only affects corporate profitability, but also sends shockwaves throughout the supply chain, from parts suppliers and local factories to dealerships and after-sales service providers. As production scales back, layoffs become inevitable, inflicting further pain on communities already grappling with economic uncertainty. The immediate effects on the auto industry rapidly spill over into other sectors, triggering a series of adverse economic events. Higher production costs, resulting from the tariffs, set off a chain reaction that ultimately impacts consumer prices across the board. When the cost to manufacture a vehicle increases significantly, the repercussions are felt not only by car buyers, but by every consumer who relies on automobiles for daily transportation, thereby intensifying inflationary pressures. Beyond the direct impact on vehicle purchasing, the tariffs contribute to a broader sense of uncertainty in the market. Businesses become more cautious in their investments, and consumer spending tends to slow down when people fear rising living costs. This slowdown, in turn, can reduce overall demand in the economy, potentially igniting a cycle of reduced production, lower job growth, and diminished consumer confidence. In a low-growth environment, even temporary disruptions in the supply chain can lead to prolonged economic stagnation, affecting everything from retail sales to the housing market. One of the more alarming consequences of Trump's tariff policies is the disruption of global supply chains, a core component of modern industrial logistics. The auto manufacturing sector, for instance, relies heavily on international suppliers for parts and raw materials. By imposing tariffs on imported components, the United States has inadvertently compromised the delicate balance that allows efficient production to take place. This imbalance is not confined to the auto industry alone. Sectors ranging from technology to consumer goods are now grappling with the increased cost of imported materials. A particularly illustrative example of this disruption resides in the energy sector. The United States refining industry, especially in the Midwest, has been built around processing heavy crude oil imported from Canada, a resource that accounts for over 60% of U.S. oil imports. U.S. refineries are uniquely designed to handle this specific type of crude, and any interruption in the supply from Canada could force refineries to operate below capacity, potentially leading to a dramatic spike in gas prices. Analysts suggest that even a partial disruption in this critical oil supply could result in U.S. fuel prices rising by 30% to 50%, thus affecting everything from transportation costs to fridge deliveries of everyday groceries. The repercussions of rising fuel costs extend well beyond the margins of the auto industry. With the transportation sector highly sensitive to fuel prices, escalations in gas costs have a domino effect. Companies like UPS, FedEx, and major trucking firms are already reporting increased shipping costs, a change that eventually filters down to consumers through higher retail prices. As the cost of moving goods escalates, even businesses not directly linked to energy markets find themselves squeezed by rising operational costs. In the remote regions of America, the impact is even more acute. Alaska serves as a prime example, where a single vital road connects the state to the mainland. Recent tariff adjustments have driven up the cost of this critical transit route, resulting in skyrocketing prices for fuel, food, and other essentials. For Alaskan families, many of whom allocate up to 10% of their income to cover basic necessities, the added financial strain could prove disastrous. Moreover, Alaska's tourism sector, which generates around $2 billion annually, is vulnerable to these cost increases. Escalating travel expenses are expected to lead to a significant decline in tourist numbers, potentially triggering a broader economic downturn in a region that is already grappling with some of the highest living costs in North America. While the U.S. struggles under the weight of protectionist tariffs, international competitors are rapidly adapting their strategies to secure, and even expand, their share of the global auto market. Chinese automakers, exemplified by companies like BYD, are leveraging advances in electric vehicle technology and efficient production methods. By investing heavily in cutting-edge technology and capitalizing on cost-saving strategies, Chinese firms are emerging as formidable opponents on both domestic and international fronts. Japanese automakers, too, have recalibrated their operations in response to the new trade realities. Brands such as Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and Mazda have long held a strong foothold in the U.S. market, partly due to their strategic investments in manufacturing operations in North America. However, the new U.S. tariffs have disrupted their established supply chains. Response: these companies are shifting production to regions like Southeast Asia, where operating costs are lower and the risks associated with protectionist policies are minimized. For example, Toyota has embarked on significant investments in hybrid vehicle production in Japan, targeting exports to Europe and Southeast Asia. Similarly, Honda has expanded its production facilities in Thailand, with plans to produce hundreds of thousands of vehicles each year in a cost-effective environment. These shifts are not purely reactive. They represent a strategic repositioning by international automakers to maintain long-term competitiveness. By diversifying their production locations and investing in emerging technologies, such as solid-state batteries and advanced manufacturing processes, Japanese and Chinese firms are setting the stage for a new era in automotive technology. These moves not only help sustain their market share in the face of rising U.S. tariffs, but also position them as leaders in the transition toward more sustainable, energy-efficient vehicles. The uncertainty generated by these tariff measures has not been confined to industry alone. It has also reverberated through the financial markets. Investors have grown increasingly nervous about the unpredictable policy environment, leading to sharp market fluctuations. One of the significant manifestations of this instability has been the precipitous decline in the value of the U.S. dollar. Once buoyed by investor confidence and expectations of robust domestic growth, the dollar has now depreciated by nearly 10% over a short period. This sudden fall in the dollar's value is emblematic of a broader loss of confidence in U.S. economic policies. Unpredictable tariff measures, particularly those that are imposed abruptly, such as the unexpected tariffs on Chinese imports, have created an atmosphere of uncertainty among international investors. In reaction, major holders of U.S. government debt, including China and Japan, have begun offloading significant amounts of their U.S. Treasury holdings. This mass sell-off not only contributes to rising Treasury yields, but also raises the cost at which the U.S. government can borrow money. A cyclical effect may ensue where higher borrowing costs limit available funding for public services, such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure, thereby compounding the strain on the domestic economy. The implications of a weakened dollar extend far beyond borrowing rates. As the dollar loses its strength, imported goods become more expensive, propelling an upward spiral in consumer prices. The surge in prices directly impacts everyday items, from smartphones and automobiles to household staples, forcing consumers to reassess their spending habits. In an economy already teetering under the weight of increased production costs and supply chain disruptions, the deterioration of the currency's value only further aggravates inflation, potentially catalyzing a downward economic spiral. The rising costs induced by tariffs have a cascading impact on the broader economy, particularly in how they affect the everyday American household. As vehicle prices climb by thousands of dollars, consumer purchasing power is severely diminished. The middle class, the very demographic that typically drives car sales, is now confronted with the dual burden of higher upfront costs and increasing operational expenses, such as fuel and maintenance. With vehicles and other consumer products becoming less affordable, overall consumer demand weakens. This decline not only pressures manufacturers to adjust their production figures, but also leads to a contraction in job opportunities within industries closely tied to consumer spending. In manufacturing hubs, the consequences are particularly acute. Factories operating under high tariff-induced costs could be forced to reduce production volumes or, in some cases, shut down operations altogether. Such measures would inevitably result in significant job losses, further dampening consumer confidence and spending power. The resulting socioeconomic issues are manifold. Families face financial hardships, local economies suffer from the loss of key industries, and the broader economic momentum necessary for sustained growth begins to falter. Eventually, this disruption can create a feedback loop where reduced consumer spending exacerbates job losses, which in turn further shrinks market demand, a vicious cycle that could have long-lasting effects. Among the various regional case studies, Alaska stands out as an extreme example of how interconnected and vulnerable the supply chains are in today's global economy. A single, critical road, spanning over 1,300 miles, serves as the sole connective artery between Alaska and the mainland United States. Recently, changes in tariff policy have not only affected vehicular costs, but also dramatically increased the price associated with transporting goods along this vital route. The cumulative effect of rising fuel prices, logistical challenges, and increased costs at every step of the supply chain has led to a situation where everything from food to building materials experiences a significant price surge. For the residents of Alaska, where an average family already dedicates a substantial portion of their income to basic necessities, the additional burden imposed by these tariffs is unsustainable. As the cost of living continues to climb, local businesses and services come under pressure. Moreover, Alaska's tourism industry, which generates billions of dollars in annual revenue, is also at risk. With travel costs escalating and the overall accessibility of the state deteriorating, tourist footfall is expected to decline sharply. Fewer visitors imply reductions in revenue for hotels, tour guides, and other ancillary services, thereby deepening the economic woes in a region already facing some of the highest living expenses in the nation. Perhaps the most telling aspect of these challenges is the proactive response from international competitors. As American manufacturers contend with the rising burden of tariffs, foreign companies are recalibrating their production strategies to capture market share. Chinese automaker BYD, for instance, has been making significant inroads by adopting technologies that not only reduce production costs, but also cater to the growing global demand for electric vehicles. With an impressive track record in scaling up electric vehicle production and capturing substantial revenue, BYD exemplifies how agility and innovation enable companies to thrive even amid protectionist policies. Japanese car manufacturers have also proven remarkably adaptive. Companies such as Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and Mazda have been forced to rethink their production locations and supply chain strategies in light of the tariff regime. For many years, these automakers maintained a strong presence in the U.S. market by establishing substantial production facilities in North America. However, as tariffs rise, their previously well-oiled operations have encountered serious setbacks. In response, these manufacturers are increasingly relocating production to Southeast Asia, regions where manufacturing costs are lower and political risks are less pronounced. In addition, major investments in hybrid and electric vehicle technologies signal a broader strategic intent. Rather than merely surviving tariff shocks, these companies aim to lead the future of automotive innovation. These strategic shifts are underpinned by a commitment to technological advancement. For example, significant investments in solid-state battery research and automation are revolutionizing how cars are built, ensuring that these companies retain a competitive edge. By embracing renewable energy sources and sustainable production practices, international automakers are not only mitigating the risks posed by tariff-induced disruptions, but are also setting the stage for a greener, more resilient industry. This proactive stance is gradually carving out a more balanced global auto market, where American manufacturers must now compete not only on cost, but also on innovation and efficiency. The economic turbulence generated by unpredictable tariff policies has not been confined to the realm of manufacturing and energy. In financial markets, the aftershocks have been equally pronounced. The sudden imposition and subsequent reversal of certain tariff measures have sent shockwaves that led to a rapid decline in investor confidence. Markets, once buoyed by steady economic growth and robust domestic policies, are now grappling with volatility that affects everything from stock prices to bond yields. A critical outcome of this uncertainty has been the marked decline in the U.S. dollar's value. Once considered a pillar of global financial stability, the dollar has suffered significant depreciation, a trend that has broad implications for international trade. For instance, as the value of the dollar wanes, imported goods become more expensive, thereby fueling inflation across various sectors. This depreciation not only influences consumer behavior, but also affects the cost structure of American businesses that rely heavily on imported components. In response, global investors have begun to shift their portfolios away from U.S. assets, exacerbating the financial strain on the nation's economy. The repercussions of this market volatility extend well beyond the confines of traditional industries, with major international holders, including China and Japan, offloading their U.S. Treasury bonds en masse. The cost of borrowing for the United States has risen sharply. A rapid increase in Treasury yields signals that the risk associated with U.S. government debt is perceived to be higher, an outcome that could have long-term consequences for fiscal policy and public spending. In an environment where each percentage point of increased borrowing costs chips away at budgets allocated for healthcare, education, and infrastructure, the stability of the nation's financial system stands on increasingly precarious ground. Perhaps the most personal dimension of these ongoing economic transformations is the impact on everyday American citizens. With tariffs pushing up the prices of vehicles, fuel, and a myriad of other consumer goods, households face mounting financial pressure. The middle class, the very engine of American consumer spending, is now locked in a battle against rising costs that threaten to erode their purchasing power. Every additional dollar spent on auto components or imported goods represents a direct hit to disposable income, forcing families to reconsider priorities such as housing, education, and healthcare. This erosion of consumer confidence and spending power creates a feedback loop that can stifle economic growth. As demand dwindles, businesses are forced to cut back on production, lay off workers, or even shutter operations entirely, a scenario that in turn leads to further reductions in consumer spending. The resulting economic contraction, fueled by a combination of high production costs, rising prices, and diminished consumer confidence, poses a stark challenge to policymakers attempting to steer the nation through turbulent economic waters. Moreover, the tariff measures do not operate in isolation. They are part of a broader trend in which protectionist policies generate uncertainty, not just domestically, but also on the global stage. The interplay between rising domestic costs and shifting global production networks creates an environment where long-term planning becomes fraught with risks. For policymakers, this situation calls for a reassessment of trade strategies and a careful balancing of interests between protecting domestic industries and ensuring that American businesses remain competitive in an interconnected global market. The unfolding narrative of Trump's tariff policies provides a sobering look at how protectionist measures can reverberate far beyond their intended scope. What began as an attempt to shield domestic industries has spiraled into a complex web of economic challenges. The dramatic surge in auto prices, widespread job losses, disruptions in global supply chains, and the destabilization of financial markets are all part of a multifaceted crisis that demands thoughtful, strategic responses. American manufacturers like Ford find themselves at a crossroads, forced to contend with rising costs, the threat of production cuts, and the specter of overseas relocation. Simultaneously, international competitors are not merely waiting in the wings. They are actively reshaping their strategies, optimizing technology, and realigning global production networks in anticipation of a future where historical trade balances may no longer apply. This reconfiguration of the global auto industry underscores a broader truth. In today's intertwined economic ecosystem, the actions of one nation can have far-reaching consequences that ripple across continents and industries alike. Fiscal instability triggered by these policy decisions further complicates the picture. With the US dollar losing ground and investor confidence ebbing, the traditional pillars of economic stability are being called into question. As government borrowing costs rise and everyday consumers face dwindling purchasing power, the American economy finds itself on a precarious precipice, the stability of which may well depend on a swift and strategic recalibration of trade and fiscal policies. Ultimately, the situation serves as a cautionary tale about the complexities of modern global trade. The interconnected nature of today's supply chains means that protectionist measures, though designed to shield domestic industries, can inadvertently expose them to vulnerabilities well beyond their borders. It is a potent reminder that economic resilience in the 21st century requires cooperation, innovation, and an ability to adapt to rapidly changing global dynamics. As the United States and its trading partners navigate this turbulent era, the lessons learned from these tariff-induced disruptions will likely shape policy debates, influence long-term business strategies, and redefine what it means to be competitive in a global economy. In summary, Trump's tariff policies have set in motion a series of consequences that extend from the auto assembly lines of Detroit through the refining hubs of the Midwest and into the global strategies of international manufacturers. American workers, middle-class families, and local economies are left grappling with higher prices and job insecurity, while global competitors are seizing the opportunity to reinvent production and technology. Whether the U.S. can recalibrate its approach to trade and ultimately restore balance to its economic relationships remains to be seen. What is clear, however, is that the era of predictable trade policies has come to an end, replaced by a challenging, interconnected future that demands creative solutions and robust international collaboration. As this new chapter unfolds, policymakers and industry leaders must work together to mitigate the adverse effects of these tariffs. Only by embracing both innovation and cooperation can the U.S. ensure that its industries remain competitive and that its consumers are not unduly burdened by the fallout of protectionist measures. The current scenario is a stark illustration of how deeply intertwined economic policies are with the livelihoods of everyday people, an interconnectedness that is certain to shape the global economic landscape for years to come. Through careful reassessment and strategic realignment, there remains hope that the challenges posed by these tariffs can be overcome. Adjusting trade policies to better reflect the realities of a globalized economy, supporting domestic industries with targeted investments in technology and sustainability, and fostering international dialogue will be essential steps in rebuilding confidence. The lessons learned during this period of tariff-induced turbulence may well serve as the foundation for a more resilient, diversified, and competitive economic future, one where the strengths of domestic manufacturing and international cooperation are not mutually exclusive, but rather work hand in hand to drive innovation and growth. In this era marked by uncertainty and rapid change, the story of Trump's tariff policies serves as both a warning and an opportunity, a call to re-examine long-held assumptions about trade, to innovate in the face of adversity, and to recognize that the solutions of tomorrow require a global perspective rooted in collaboration and mutual benefit.